Welcome back to my kitchen. Today I am handling a task that I've been needing to do for the last few months, and that is rendering lard. So I pulled a couple bags of pork fat out of the freezer, and that's what I'm going to be dealing with today. This is still mostly frozen, which is what I want, and this is the fat from the 2 pigs that we raised last year. We butchered them in October. Last year was actually our first year raising pigs for meat, and I told everyone I was just as excited for the lard as I was for the meat, which is true, so I'm really looking forward to getting this stocked on our shelf. So there are many ways that you can render lard. You can do this in the oven on a low temperature, like 225. I'm going to be doing it on the stovetop today, again, on a low temperature. You can do this in a slow cooker. I know that's a really popular way to do it. And I've also heard about doing it in the Instant Pot, which I'm a little bit curious about. So if you have tried that, let me know in the comments down below. All I'm going to be doing here is taking all this pork fat and chopping it into about 1/2-inch pieces. And I'm going to be trimming off any pieces of skin or meat, and that's going to help us get a really clean flavor. I've got a bowl set up here just for any parts that I'm going to be discarding. And then I'm cutting this all into about 1/2-inch pieces. Now, I have also heard about people using a meat grinder. The smaller that you cut, the faster it's going to render down. I don't have a meat grinder, but I can see how that would make this process much faster. So if you do, you can definitely utilize that. And having it a little bit frozen like this just makes it a lot easier to work with. As I mentioned, this has been on my to-do list for quite a while now, and one of the reasons I wanted to get it done is because I found out that the piglets we're getting this year were born yesterday. So they're going to be arriving mid-April, and I just want to get to all of these tasks that are a lot easier to do when we have less to do outside as far as the garden's concerned and animals to care for. So I am trying to get through all of these projects, like rendering our lard. And another thing that I really need to get done is I need to can a whole lot of chicken bone broth. So we, with the chickens that we raise, part some and keep quite a lot of them whole. And usually what I'll do is, as I cook a whole one, I just immediately will make some broth. However, sometimes I don't have time or I'm feeling lazy and they just get thrown back into the freezer. So I've got a lot of chicken bones that I'd also like to get dealt with. So all of those kind of things that are easier to find time for in the winter are projects that I am trying to get done. A lot of the recipes or the methods that you'll see for rendering lard will call for adding like 1/4 to 1/2 cup of water to the crock pot or the stock pot to prevent anything from like initially sticking before it begins to melt. And I am choosing not to do that just because if there's any water content left in the lard after you have rendered it down, it's going to spoil faster. So I would rather just slowly melt this down and avoid anything sticking, burning that way versus adding the water, just to make sure that there's no additional moisture that could spoil this. So once I have a good layer of fat in my roasting pan, I am just going to put that onto the stovetop over very low heat and allow that to slowly begin to melt, and then I'll just continue adding to it. I just have a thin layer of pork fat here in my roaster, and I have this over low heat right now, and I'm just going to allow some of that fat to render down, and I'm going to be stirring it pretty regularly for this first part just to make sure that nothing scorches, and then I'll begin to add in the rest of the fat. Now that some of the fat has begun to render out, I'm going to go ahead and begin adding in the rest of the fat. I've still got a good chunk of back fat to get chopped up, so I'm going to work on that and then add that into the pot. That is just going to stay on low heat for several hours. I'm going to stir that frequently. So I'll bring you guys back in a little bit when we're a little bit closer to being done the process. All right, I'm gonna call this good. Now I could cook this down a little bit longer, especially for those pieces that were added in a little bit later. However, I don't want to cook the cracklings until they're too brown because that can impart more of a porky flavor on the lard and cause it to not be that pure white that you want. So I'm gonna call this good, get these strained off, and then strain the lard through a fine mesh strainer with some cheesecloth. I also did not take note of how many pounds of fat I had. I would just be curious to know the weight of the fat that I started out with and how many pints I end up with in the end. So I'll try and see if I have that information on the cut sheet, just because I'd be curious, maybe some of you would as well. And another thing that I wanted to note is that when we got our pigs butchered, I told them that I wanted to keep the fat, but I did not specify that I wanted the fat surrounding the kidneys, which is what's used to make leaf lard, which is typically used in baking. I did not say that I wanted that separate. So it was all packaged up together with the back fat, which is fine. I just did not separate it out. All of that was rendered down together. Now I'm filling pint jars. That's just a size that will work well for us. I've got a fine mesh strainer over my pint jar with some cheesecloth. If you can, get a better quality cheesecloth. This is just what the grocery store had, but it's not what I typically buy. I'll link the one that I typically buy down in the description box below. But this stuff, I find that you need more layers. It's not very fine and it tends to fray quite a bit. And while it's still hot, I'm just gonna put on a clean lid and ring so that the lard seals. It's gonna look a little yellow right now, but as it cools, it'll turn into a pure white. I've got all of that lard strained off, and since I applied the lids while the lard was still hot, I should see seals on all of those jars, so I'll be sure to check that tomorrow. Now, assuming there are no impurities in the lard, if you added any water, all of that was cooked off, lard is shelf stable for anywhere from like 6 months to 2 years. I've seen a lot of varying information on that. That being said, it'll be very evident if it does go bad. I personally choose to just store it in the fridge just to play it safe, and we have an extra fridge in the basement with the space to do so, and we'll be eating off that for at least a year. Again, it's going to be very clear if it does go bad. So thank you guys for joining me in the kitchen today. I am super excited to be restocked on lard, this time from our own pigs. I'll see you in the next video.